The butcher's boy is dead, and nothing about it feels simple. Welcome to Phantom Mystery. I'm your host, Edmund Cross. Where are you listening from today? Your comments mean the world. I never miss a single one. Let's step inside the mystery. It was one of those golden afternoons in St. Mary Mead, when the sunlight seemed intent on blessing even the humblest of cottages. The vicarage lawn was alive with chatter, tables laid with sponge cakes, cucumber sandwiches, and shining pots of tea. Bunting fluttered lazily in the September breeze, and the brass band from Much Benham struck up a tune that wobbled, but never entirely lost its cheer. Miss Jane Marple, settled in a wicker chair at the edge of the festivities, observed with her usual serene interest. To anyone passing by, she might have seemed content merely to sip her tea and nibble at a slice of seed cake. Yet her blue eyes missed nothing. The way young Sylvia Carter dropped her gaze whenever Dr. Lansing approached, the faint stiffness between Mrs. Price Ridley and her sister-in-law, and the restless shifting of young Tommy Briggs, the butcher's boy, who hovered by the refreshment table with all the energy of a restless pup. Tommy was not much more than 17, tall and broad for his age, with a mop of sandy hair and a grin that too easily invited mischief. He had of late become a familiar sight around the village, carrying heavy cuts from Mr. Sims's butcher shop, whistling in the lanes or leaning against the gate at twilight with a cigarette he was too young to buy. Miss Marple, who knew the village better than anyone, had already formed the quiet opinion that Tommy was destined to cause trouble, though perhaps not of the sort one might expect. The party was in full swing when the incident occurred. It began with a commotion by the lemonade table, a sharp cry, the clatter of a jug breaking, and then the sound of something, or someone, falling heavily against the grass. Conversation faltered. The band trailed into a sour note and heads turned as one. Tommy Briggs lay stretched upon the lawn, his face pale, his limbs oddly twisted. A ripple of shock moved through the assembly. At first someone laughed nervously, supposing it a boyish prank, but as Mrs. Lansing bent down, her gloved hand trembling against the boy's throat, the laughter died. "He's not breathing," she whispered. The vicar's wife gave a little scream. Cups rattled on saucers. Mr. Sims, the butcher himself, forced his way through the crowd with a terrible look on his face, and Miss Marple, quietly setting down her teacup, thought, though she did not yet speak, "So it has begun." The first minutes after Mrs. Lansing's whisper were filled with busy, useless sounds. A spoon clinked onto a plate, a shoe scuffed the grass, a small sob vanished into a handkerchief. Dr. Lansing pushed through with the careful brusqueness of a man who knows both his duty and its limits. He knelt, loosened Tommy's collar, lifted an eyelid and looked across at his wife. The look was brief and private, like a door closing. "Fetch the constable," he said. "Hand, please, give us air." The circle widened, but not much. Curiosity at a village fete is heavier than decency. Mr. Sims, still in his butcher's apron over a Sunday suit, hovered with a helpless, working face. "Tommy, lad," he muttered, almost scolding, as if the boy might spring up out of contrariness. Miss Marple, who had not risen at all, drew her shawl close and noted how people arranged themselves around disaster. Mrs. Price Ridley moved to the front because she had never resisted a stage. The vicar murmured a prayer too quietly to hear, which was kind. His wife, flurried and pink, urged those nearest to drink the lemonade while it was still cold, which was not. The brass band had clumped near the gazebo, discussing whether to pack up. Their tuba player proposed the Dead March, and the vicar gently dissuaded him, because grief does not benefit from a flourish. Dr. Lansing did not take long. "He's gone," he said, gentle but final. "I will see to matters. We should have Sergeant Lake." Sylvia Carter darted away to do just that, eager to be useful in a way that was also escape. Miss Marple set down her cup and let her eyes rest on the broken jug near the table's edge. Lemon slices glistened on the grass, cheerful yellow against the slack line of the boy's arm, which lay partly in the sugary puddle. "Poor child," said Mrs. Bantry, arriving breathlessly and taking Miss Marple's arm as though she were a steady post. "They say it's his heart. Boys drink dreadful concoctions for their muscles." "Do they?" Miss Marple asked mildly. "In my experience, they drink for courage rather than for muscles, though neither beverage is recommended. The first theory rose at once, because people like completion." "Heat," declared Mrs. Price Ridley, making sure to be overheard. "Heat and excitement. He always was a rough boy. Heart overtaxed." "It is hardly hot," Miss Hartnell observed, tilting her head toward a well-timed cloud. "And rough boys do not faint. They punch fences." "Then a stroke," Mrs. Price Ridley amended. Firm as the shutting of a window, Mr. Sims said nothing. Owners feel things in complicated ways. He stared not at Tommy's face, but at the boy's hand, half-curled, palm up, a faint sugar glaze on the fingertips. When his eyes lifted, they met Miss Marple's. He looked away quickly, as if caught at a private grief. Sergeant Lake arrived at a brisk trot, hat a little askew, as if he had hurried while trying not to appear to. He ducked beneath the bunting. The garden stilled. He nodded to Miss Marple because everyone in St. Mary Mead nodded to Miss Marple, then to the doctor. "No sign of struggle?" He asked, notebook ready. "None that I can see," Dr. Lansing replied. "No visible wound. I cannot say more here." "Collapse, then," Lake said, but with a question. "An event," Miss Marple murmured. "The sort is the puzzle. Anyone see what happened?" Lake called. Answers came in the village manner, overlapping, confident and contradictory. "Mrs. Larkin?" "Who ladled lemonade. Thought Tommy had been helping a child with a cup." "Mr. Beale?" "The grocer. Thought he had seen the boy wipe his mouth." Sylvia returned, pale beneath her prettiness, and offered water to no one in particular. Lake told her kindly to keep steady, and sent a constable for a stretcher. He asked that the area around the table be kept clear. The broken jug had a neck like a ruined castle. 2 fat wasps had already claimed the spill and tugged industriously at a lemon seed, as if tragedy were an inconvenience, to be worked around. Miss Marple watched the wasps. With that absent concentration, old ladies are allowed. She turned her eyes to the tablecloth, and saw 3 damp rings where cups had stood. 2 near together, a third a little apart. The third was darker, the way a careful person leaves the least possible mark. "Sergeant," she asked in a gentle aside, "do you know the boy's people?" "Mother dead. Father on a lorry to Downshire. Lodged over the shop with Mr. Sims." Miss Marple nodded as if that answered something else. She turned to the butcher with a softness that made room for grief. "Would you care to sit, Mr. Sims?" "I would not," he said thickly. "Beg pardon. I would like to know who put hands on that boy." "No one touched him," Mrs. Price Ridley proclaimed. "Indecent to suggest." Sims shot her a look that could divide meat. "Indecent or not, Tommy had enemies. Lads do, and I'm not blind in my own shop. Cash short last week." "Nonsense," I told myself. "He carries the takings sometimes when I'm cutting late." "There's talk." "About Tommy?" Miss Marple asked, as if talk were the weather. He hesitated. "He kept company with the Carter girl, the doctor's maid's niece, nice girl. But a fellow in much Benham doesn't take kindly to being cut out." "A brawl?" Lake asked sharply. "We've no sign of one. I'm saying lads do foolish things," Sims muttered. "And men worse." Miss Marple's eyes drifted to Sylvia, who had moved a little apart, hands worrying the sash of her frock. "Pretty as early summer. Pretty can lead to altar or ruin according to the soil." The girl was looking at the lemonade table as if a riddle might answer itself there. "Did he eat or drink just before?" Miss Marple asked. "Lemonade?" Lake said. "Half the village did." "Indeed," she murmured. But not all at the same moment. The fate was ended by decree of the doctor's wife, who possessed a tidy mind for disaster. People obeyed gratefully. Obedience after a shock feels like protection. As the lawn emptied, Miss Marple saw what the crowds had hidden, a crumpled paper bag half under the table. She stooped and picked it up. Grease had bled through. Inside, sugar-dusted sweets, too flattened as if impatient fingers had tested them. Faint perfume drifted up, pleasant but not quite right. "Tommy's," Mr. Beale said at once. "He's all for barley sugar. You can hear him in the shop by the rustle?" "I dare say," Miss Marple said, breathing the faint almond that did not belong. "Curious." Lake's head came up. "Curious how?" "One seldom finds almond in barley sugar," she said, merely noting a mislaid button. She passed the bag to him. He directed that the jug, cups, and ladle be taken. No washing up yet. The vicar looked pained but compliant. Miss Marple walked in the purposeless way old ladies are permitted, and in ambling found purpose. The grass by the table was scuffed, not from the fall but from earlier restless feet. A slice of lemon lay on the lawn with a neat little nick in the rind, not the mark of a tooth. She tucked the observation away. "Miss Marple," Sylvia said suddenly, courage surprising her own voice. "He said he'd make it right, Tommy." Miss Marple kept her tone kind, because shock makes confessions cheap. "He told me this morning by the lich gate. He'd borrowed well-taken £2 from Mr. Sims. He meant to put it back with tips. Only someone saw. Someone asked him for a favour to keep quiet. I said he should tell Mr. Sims and be done, but he said the favour wasn't bad, only foolish." "And did he do it?" "I don't know. We were to meet by the lemonade to talk. Then he fell." The last words broke like thin glass. "My dear, go home now," Miss Marple said, touching her arm. "Sergeant Lake will speak with you tomorrow. Keep warm. Don't sit alone." When the girl had gone, Lake came to Miss Marple with a look that asked for sense. "You're thinking something," he said. "I am thinking many things, which is another way of saying I do not yet have the right one," she replied. "Consider. A light-fingered boy takes £2, is seen and is pressed for a favour. Pride urges him to set matters right. Pride keeps poor company with prudence. If the favour were to carry a parcel or whisper a word, that would be ordinary. Yet the result is not ordinary at all." "You think poison," Lake said. "Happier once a thing is named." "Almond is suspicious in these circumstances," she said. "Lemonade is obliging to many substances, sweet and friendly to the tongue. But there were sweets as well, and sweets can be shared." Lake followed the line to its unpleasant end. He looked across the lawn where children had tumbled, and old ladies pinned flowers to hats. "You mean Tommy might not have been the target? I mean we must not assume boys fall for boyish reasons," Miss Marple answered. "Keep an open mind until the village closes it for you." A fretful wind tugged at the bunting. The fete showed its bones, a pretty contrivance laid over real life. The stretcher came. Tommy was carried away with a compromise between dignity and haste. Mr. Sims walked beside, hands clenched. Mrs. Price Ridley declared that strong moral fibre prevented such things. No one listened. When they were gone, the lawn felt larger and lonelier. Dr. Lansing passed with his bag and fatigue. Miss Marple stopped him with a small question. "Was there any quarrel near the lemonade?" "My wife told off a band fellow for smoking near the children," he said. "That is all. Thank you." Miss Marple stepped aside. She knew Mrs. Lansing believed telling off to be a complete treatment for disorder. She looked again at the 3 rings on the cloth, at sugar crystals winking like frost, at the paper bag with its not-supposed-to-be-there scent. "Yes," she said to herself, answering a perfectly ordinary remark. "There will be more to do before bedtime." The village held its breath, and the shadows lengthened slowly. Dusk folded the village until only the clink of cups and the creak of gates remained. Miss Marple did not go straight home. She liked to walk while impressions were fresh. The bell at the butcher's gave a tired jingle. Inside, air smelt of sawdust and iron. Mr. Sims, still in his apron, sat on a stool with his big hands quiet. He softened at the sight of Miss Marple. "I'm not a customer," she said gently, "only a listener if you've any need of one." "Kind of you," he managed. "They've taken the boy to Much Benham. The doctor wants to find out exactly. I can't bring myself to say the word." "We needn't," Miss Marple said. "Tell me whether anything had lately tugged Tommy off his usual course." Besides the £2, he'd been jumpy, Sims said, kept glancing at the door. Said someone had asked a favour, and if he did it once, the talk would stop. Wouldn't say who. There's Len Harper from Much Benham. Grease under his nails, quick temper. He and Tommy had words. Favour and pride make poor friends, Miss Marple observed. Tommy had barley sugar today. Always. Bought from Beale's. Mr. Beale rolls his paper, Miss Marple murmured. The bag by the table had been folded twice. Hands leave signatures. Sims frowned, not following and trusting nonetheless. If it was poison, could it have been meant for me? I left my cup near his. It is possible, she said, and equally possible it was meant for him. Until we know, lock early and alter your habits. He nodded, grateful for orders. She left him to sweep a floor that could not be tidied, and walked home to put the kettle on. It had scarcely begun to sing when Serena Lansing's neat knock sounded. The doctor's wife entered composed, as if one must be tidy to carry fear. I cannot stay, she said, taking a seat. I wish to assure you I kept the lemonade properly, and yet I felt I had missed something. Everyone misses something, Miss Marple said, pouring tea. When did you fill the jug? 2:15, Mrs. Larkin brought sugar. I sliced the lemons. We used the pump. I set it on the trestle and covered it. At 2:55, Mrs. Price Ridley whisked the napkin off. Earlier, at 2:30, I fetched more napkins. When I returned, the cover was crooked. I straightened it and told myself not to fuss. Fuss is related to caution, Miss Marple said. Did you drink? The first cup. If there was poison, not inevitably, Miss Marple returned. Some poisons live in small pockets. Sugar can carry them kindly. Serena's face tightened. Do you suppose the sweets? I suppose anything charming and small, Miss Marple said. You have helped by remembering the crookedness. Serena departed with her armour refastened. Morning found certainty already growing where shock had been. Sergeant Lake came up Miss Marple's path, hat square, eyes gritty. You were right about almond, he said. Cyanide. If by lemonade, it was a pocket, not the whole. If by sweets, 1 or 2 only. Cyanide is impatient, Miss Marple said. The hand that used it was not. A fate offers cover and confusion. Sit, Sergeant, he sat. Tommy had sugar on his fingers and lemon on his wrist. No burns in the mouth. 1 barley sugar in the bag is clean. Mr. Beale? She asked. He sold the boy sweets yesterday, not today, so he says. Claims he saw Len Harper by the hedge. Says Harper laughed when the jug fell. I have Harper coming in. We're checking sheds, rat killers and photograph chemicals. You are industrious, Miss Marple said. Ask Mr. Sims whether any small bottle has gone astray. Lake wrote. And Beale? He rolls his paper. Yesterday's bag was folded. It may mean nothing. It may mean someone else provided the sweets. She paused. I should like to speak with Sylvia Carter, before the village talks her sense out of shape. The Carter cottage smelled of starch and potatoes. Mrs. Carter opened to refuse the caller, and then admitted her on recognizing a stronger will disguised as gentleness. Sylvia came down quickly, eyes swollen but steadier. I told Sergeant Lake everything, she began, then faltered. Not quite. Aunt says not to speak ill of respectable people. Truth grows ill in silence, Miss Marple said. Let it out for a little walk. Last night Mr. Beale stopped Tommy outside the Lion. He gave him a paper twist and said, For your sweet tooth. Don't be late tomorrow or you'll miss your chance. Tommy laughed, but not like himself. He told me someone wanted him to look at a book with numbers and say whether 2 numbers matched. If he did that, things would be put right. He would not say whose book. A ledger is a book with numbers, Miss Marple said. A supplier's invoice is another. The council keeps them too. He said it was only foolishness, Sylvia whispered. He said no one would be hurt. The young are optimists out of charity, Miss Marple said. You have been brave. Stay at home today and tell your aunt every scrap. She will retail it and you will be watched. Being watched is a safety. Miss Marple returned to the lane. The village had regained its day clothes. Mr. Beale arranged apples. A boy pedalled hard toward Much Benham. Lake found Miss Marple again near noon. "We've had Harper in," he said. "Sulky. Denies being at the fete. Says Beale lies. Theatre stubs and grease, nothing else. Men often keep guilt in other people's rooms," Miss Marple said. "And Beale?" "He admits giving the twist. Says he treats boys. Says the chance was the tug-of-war, which is nonsense. I asked to see his books. He laughed and said I'd find them exemplary." "You will," Miss Marple said. "What is not written is where the story hides. Nonetheless, look for a missing invoice. Eggs for the fete, perhaps." "Eggs?" Lake blinked. "Mrs. Bantry disliked the quiches," he groaned. "You're the despair of tidy men." "Order is a fine thing," Miss Marple said, rising. "But do not confuse it with truth." She turned into the grocer's, pausing to admire a pyramid of oranges stacked with vanity. The bell sounded. Mr. Beale, sleeves rolled, smiled the smile a tradesman keeps within reach. "Good morning, Miss Marple. What can I tempt you with?" "Nearly anything," she said. "I came for nothing in particular, and perhaps a word. Yesterday you were generous to a boy. One hopes it was not misplaced." He chuckled, shaking his head at the mischief of old ladies. "I give all the lads a sweet now and then." "Indeed. And sometimes a chance not to be late," Miss Marple said lightly. "Such chances can be particular. They can involve a book with numbers." For half a beat his eyes shuttered, then opened. "You do love a riddle," he said. "I like a proper account," Miss Marple replied. "One that balances." The door jangled as another customer came in. She stepped aside, smiling into the bustle. Under that smile, something patient and exact had found the edge of the seam. A village is like knitting for the moment. A dropped stitch seems a trifle, yet if not taken up at once, the pattern puckers. Miss Marple crossed the green where the bunting hung limp, and paused by the stacked trestles. A smear of sugared pulp dried glassy on a plank. A wasp insisted on the memory of sweetness. Sergeant Lake hailed her with the briskness of a man late to his own intention. "Council invoices all present," he reported. "Eggs, flour, lemons, sugar, everything in order." Beale sent 2 sacks by the boy. Mrs. Lansing signed. "Order is a handsome coat," Miss Marple said. "It hides shirt sleeves and stains. You still favor the sweets?" "Cyanide prefers intimacy," she replied. A pocket, a fold, a groove. One clean barley sugar only proves there were others not clean. And the paper, folded twice. Habits fold themselves. When we know whose habit, we shall know more. They parted at the vicarage gate, where Serena Lansing pinned dishcloths as if linen could ward disaster. "I have told everyone to keep their tongues," she announced, which meant she had heard everything. "Thoughts are harder to keep than words," Miss Marple said. When the sugar was delivered, "Did anyone besides Tommy and yourself come into the kitchen?" "Half the village," Serena said. "Bandmaster for cups. The vicar to say I was doing wonderfully. Mrs. Price Ridley to demand legible labels. And Mr. Beale asked if I had all I needed." "Precisely." "And the little knife you used for lemons. You said it had shifted." Serena nodded. "I placed it by the board. When I returned with napkins, it lay to the right, as if set down by a left hand. It is ridiculous to notice such a thing." "Ridiculous noticing is noticing done by a tidy mind," Miss Marple said. "It turns wallpaper into pattern." She left Serena calmer and crossed to the butcher's. Mr. Sims emerged, wiping his hands. His eyes were red at the rims, but his jaw had taken up its stubborn post. "They'll hold the inquest tomorrow," he said. "I shall be made to look a fool for trusting him with takings, and a brute for working him, and a villain for lodging him." "You will be made to look what you are," Miss Marple said. "A conscientious man with a temper when prodded." "Did Tommy take out anything besides the sugar?" "Ran a parcel to Mrs. Larkins," Sims said. Returned whistling. "He said he'd make something right. If the poison was meant for me, I wish the hand had struck straight and spared the boy." "That is precisely why the hand chose otherwise," she answered. By the lion, men in shirt-sleeves spoke of sport to avoid speaking fear. Len Harper leaned with indolence and touched his cap. "You were fond of the Carter girl," Miss Marple said conversationally. It is a strain when a young man finds himself supplanted. Not by some butcher's lad, he said, grin too quick. Anyway, it's not my affair. Affairs send their bills, she observed. You wagered on the tug-of-war. He shrugged. Everyone does. Not everyone collects beforehand. Mr. Beale is scrupulous. He would wish to know the odds. His eyes slid. Ask him then. I have, she said, and walked on. At the grocer's, shutters were half down, but a light showed. Through an ill-fit blind, she saw Mr. Beale at his desk. He turned a ledger without reading, opened a drawer, took out a small round tin, contemplated it like harsh medicine, and put it back carefully. After that, he wrote with an air of having decided on an alibi. Miss Marple did not need to see the label. A village without cameras still photographs everything. One has only to live there long enough to develop the plates. She went home thinking of a knife set by a left hand, and paper twisted to a particular fold. She woke early. The inquest drew a packed room. The coroner, tidy and patient, moved them through the form. Dr. Lansing testified, hydrocyanic acid, rapid, no violence, administration uncertain. Serena gave times. The sugar at 2:30, the cover lifted at 2 to 3, the crookedness put right, and mentioned the knife moved to the right. Mr. Beale said he had given Tommy a sweet yesterday as a treat and none today. Len Harper swore to an alibi in Much Benham. His friend supported him until the coroner asked which film they had seen. He named the wrong one. The verdict was death by misadventure, poison by person or persons unknown. The village accepted it as it accepts a bad harvest, with shaking heads and a settling into habit. Outside, opinions sprouted quickly. Mrs. Price Ridley said it proved decay of standards. Miss Hartnell thought it a foreign trick. The bandmaster blamed the pump. Miss Marple slipped away while minds congratulated themselves. She walked to the allotments behind the grocer's, where sheds kept their secrets under tarred felt. She did not try Mr. Beale's padlock. She had no need. Beside the compost lay a scatter of lemon rinds. She bent, careful not to touch, and saw 3 with neat nicks at the white, not teeth, not careless knife work, but punctures from the tip of a small blade. One might draw off liquid with such a prick. One might also steep a rind briefly to scent a thing. Footsteps came on the path, light and deliberate. Not a constable. They never tread softly. Whoever it was had watched her go and now wished to see what she saw. She turned with an expression of mild surprise and found, not alarmingly but precisely, the person she had hoped for. "Good morning," Miss Marple said, as if they had met over the price of wool. "I'm glad of company. I dislike standing alone with only my thoughts. They sharpen themselves to points." The face before her worked through choices and settled on friendliness. "I was only out for a turn," the person said. "I didn't expect to find anyone here." "No one expects to find anyone where they themselves have no business," Miss Marple answered. "Forgive a question. On the afternoon of the fete, did you bring anything you did not carry away?" A blink, then the laugh that buys time. "Only a headache. These revels are fatiguing." "Headaches are," Miss Marple agreed. "They come from curious causes, heat, quarrels, the smell of almonds." The eyes flickered, no more than a shutter catching light, and steadied. "You are teasing me, Miss Marple." "I am far too old to tease," she said. "I only collect." She stepped so that person, compost, and the nicked rinds made a tidy triangle. "Do tell Sergeant Lake, when next you see him, that I have developed an unaccountable interest in lemonade." "I am sure he will be amused," came the reply. "Good morning." "Good morning," Miss Marple said, and watched the back take the curve of the path too quickly. The hedges closed, whispering. She looked again at the rinds, at the careful piercings, at the mark of a blade lifted by a left hand, and thought, with a small inward nod, that the pattern was forming at last. Though the colour of the yarn was still to be decided, the visitor's quick retreat left a hush that went on humming in Miss Marple's mind. She did not stoop nearer the rinds. It is unwise to tidy someone else's mess before they have noticed what they dropped. Instead, she walked straight to the lane, and allowed her feet to find Sergeant Lake, because men in authority behave best when given something definite to do. She met him outside the police house in conversation with a bent gardener who had lost his wheelbarrow as if it were a sheep. "Lemon rinds at the allotments behind the grocer's," Miss Marple said pleasantly, as if offering a recipe. "3 punctured neatly as by a small point. I should not like to say for what purpose until you have had a look." Lake's face cleared with the relief of a man handed an angle rather than a lecture. "Behind Beale's, is it? Right. Morgan, fetch the kit." He glanced back. "You didn't touch them?" "I am old, not foolish," Miss Marple said. "Do not go alone. She did not accompany them. Curiosity must sometimes stay behind, so that it can be confided in later." Instead, she turned toward the Carter cottage, where grief had to coexist with washing and dinner. The window was open, and Sylvia sat inside, threading a needle with the frown of someone forcing order into the day. "You did quite right yesterday," Miss Marple said without preamble. "Plain truth is unglamorous but very serviceable. I wonder if you would tell me one more thing. When Tommy spoke of the book with numbers, did he say who owned it?" Sylvia hesitated. "He said her book, and I asked whose, and he said, 'The tidy ones, the one who tells people where to put the spoons.' I suppose he meant Mrs. Lansing." "Miss, tidy minds make good lists," Miss Marple said. "Did he say why he was asked?" "He has a knack," Sylvia answered, half defiant on the boy's behalf. "He can spot a wrong total without counting through. He says figures look like faces to him, and he sees which one is sulking." "A very useful talent," Miss Marple murmured. "Did he tell you what he found?" "He said the eggs did not marry the money," Sylvia whispered. "Only a little, only shillings. And then he said not to worry, because it would be set straight and no one blamed. He wanted Mr. Sims to think well of him again." Miss Marple smoothed the girl's sleeve. "Shillings make pounds when they go in file," she said. "You have helped him still." She left the cottage with that slight set to the mouth that meant a stitch had been found and taken up. The green lay in its ordinary afternoon clothes. Mothers spoke over prams, and boys aimed pebbles at a gatepost because pebbles do not argue. At the grocer's, however, ordinariness had mislaid itself. The shutters were up entirely now. But the door stood open to Lake's voice. Mr. Beale, sleeves rolled, had the look of a man told his roof leaks in a storm, and that a gentleman from the council requires tea at once. Lake's constable, careful and plodding, held a paper-wrapped parcel marked Citric 1 Melbino, and a small tin with a scuffed lid. "Photography plates," Beale said with ill-humoured ease. "My wife dabbles. The tin came with the old set. It's empty." "The rinds?" "Kindly customers throw anything over allotment fences. I dare say children did it." Lake looked at Miss Marple. He had seen her shadow arrive, and she shook her head slightly to discourage triumph. "We shall see what we shall see," Lake told Beale. "Meanwhile, your left hand, sir." "My what?" Beale blinked. "Knife work," Lake said. "Just show me how you halve a lemon." Beale laughed, but it came out wrong. He took a lemon from the counter and a knife from the block and, naturally and without thought, set the fruit with his right hand and cut with his left. It was merely habit. Habit is unfancy and therefore unforgettable. "Thank you," Lake said, too polite. He did not look at Miss Marple. He had learned that she heard best when men pretended she was not being spoken to. Miss Marple bought 2 oranges she did not want and went away satisfied to 3/4. Satisfaction before the end makes one clumsy. She pinned it tightly and kept walking until she reached the vicarage. Serena Lansing received her with the gratitude tidy women reserve for anyone who might keep a thing from being dirty. "I understand you keep the fate accounts temporarily," Miss Marple said, as if asking after the soup, "while the treasurer recovers from shingles." "I do," Serena answered, drawing herself up in justification of an action already justified. "It is common sense. Mr. Peabody cannot be expected to handle notes with that rash." "Common sense is a very fine rash ointment," Miss Marple agreed. "Might I see your book? I love the look of columns." Serena hesitated the polite amount and then brought a ledger with neat lines and labelled tabs. Miss Marple turned the pages with genuine pleasure. Figures stared up at her as obediently as schoolchildren. Egg money, flour money, lemons and sugar, petty cash for bunting pins. All had the clean faces of sums that knew their names. Only in the left column of a certain page was there a rub of eraser that had gone too hard and taken the surface nap with it. A figure of 2 shillings had been adjusted to 3 and 6. Below, another sum corrected to match. Both corrections were tidy and therefore conspicuous. "Mr. Peabody pays in the gross," Serena said defensively. "I checked the receipts against deliveries. If Mr. Beale sends 2 sacks, he is paid accordingly. And if someone, meaning no harm, adds a few shillings to keep things smooth, she will be forgiven by her own conscience, because good works ought not to be impeded by trivialities," Miss Marple said kindly. No, put your chin up. The worst things are done by tidy minds, but also the best." Serena's hands shook, then grew still. "I will tell the coroner," she said. "You will tell Sergeant Lake," Miss Marple returned, closing the book. "And you will tell your husband first, because marriages are wounded by surprises." Tommy saw the discrepancy and said so. Then someone gave him a little parcel to keep him merry, and perhaps a lemon rind was made to be obliging. Serena's eyes widened and then narrowed, not at Miss Marple, but at herself. "If I have caused—" "You have not caused," Miss Marple said. "You have only made space in which another person felt comfortable causing. That is not the same thing. Do what is right now." Serena went white and resolute, which was her best colour, and sped away on a clearly drawn line of confession. Miss Marple, pleased but not complacent, turned toward the butcher's because the human heart cannot endure a puzzle in solitude forever, and must sit with someone honest about. Meet Mr. Sims listened while she told him Serena's intended confession in general terms. He grunted once, not at the woman but at a whole system of village economies that carry themselves on the back of only a little. Then his mouth bent. Tommy would have crowed to put it right. He loved that sort of triumph you can call goodness. And someone loved the quiet little thefts that keep a man or woman feeling clever, Miss Marple said. I do not yet say who. But the hand that cut those lemons pricks in its sleep with the memory of a small point. A boy burst in for suet and burst out again. The doorbell jangled with a cheerfulness that had forgotten how to be appropriate. Miss Marple rose. "Lake will come," she said. "He will ask you again about bottles, powders, parcels. Remember, small containers hide in large habits." He nodded. "If this is Beale—" "If it is Beale, you will not say it until it is proved," she cut in softly. "If it is not, you will have spared yourself the cost of being wrong." Dusk came early in September when one's mind was full. The lamps had begun their modest shining when Lake arrived at Miss Marple's with news that was both more and less than he wished to bring. "The punctured rinds are interesting," he said. "No fingerprints of use. We found in Beale's tin a white dust. Not much. Enough to tell us it is not citric. The chemist thinks it could be residue from something that would speak almond in the air. Not proof, circumstantial." "Circumstance is the coat a fact wears on Sunday," Miss Marple said. "We shall take it off in proper privacy. I have also learned that Beale wages at the Lion and keeps a small book of his own," Lake added. Odds laid on tug-of-war. He had reason to prefer Sims's team wearied by worry, and reason to be friendly to Len Harper, who likes an angry crowd. But none of this gets us from motive to method. "Method is right-handed or left-handed," Miss Marple said. "You saw him cut." Lake's mouth twitched. "Left-handed, like you said. But half the village uses whatever hand is free. Serena says the knife was set to the right. She also says she altered 2 sums and is prepared to swear it. It complicates the story, makes her look sly and him merely practical. Truth is a plait," Miss Marple said. "We shall separate the strands without breaking a hair." A soft, apologetic knock came then, and Sylvia peeped in without waiting to be called, because sorrow loosens etiquette. "I thought, oh!" She saw Lake and clasped her hands. "I've done something silly. I hope it wasn't wrong." Aunt said I should not meddle, but I couldn't help it. When Tommy took me to the lich gate, he laughed at a trick he could do. He could untwist and retwist a paper so that it looked never opened. I remembered and I thought, what if the bag yesterday wasn't from Mr. Beale at all? What if someone else made it look so— Who? Lake asked gently. Sylvia flushed. I don't know. But Mrs. Larkin uses the same kind of paper for her cake slices. And she was by the table all morning, and she is left-handed. She is very kind, but she is also very quick when money goes wrong. Miss Marple's eyes brightened in a way that did not flatter or condemn. A very good memory, my dear. We will not accuse a kind woman of wickedness, because her hand prefers the left, but we will observe how quickly she can fold. Lake stood in a firmness that looked like rest. Right. I'll speak to Mrs. Larkin about paper and sweets and hands. And I'll press Beale about the tin and the wages. And Miss Marple, yes? You said this morning we should keep an open mind until the village closes it. It feels to me as if someone is pushing the door. They are, she said softly. And in pushing they will overbalance. Stand just to the side, Sergeant, and let them fall where they intended others to. Sergeant Lake left with Sylvia, promising to see her home, and the door closed softly on the whisper of their steps. Miss Marple sat a moment with her hands folded, not from fatigue but to give her mind a tidy pause that keeps facts from smudging. Then she tied on a scarf and went out by the garden path. Evening had that deceptive clarity when St. Mary Mead looks most innocent and is therefore most likely to show where it has sinned. She did not go to Mrs. Larkin first. Rumours travel faster if one gives them a head start. She paused at the pump where the fate lemonade had been drawn. The iron handle sweated. A boy's pail had just clanged off. A faint ghost of lemon lingered. The little rubbish bin had been cleared in haste. A thread of brown paper caught under the lid, a sticky gleam along the rim. The vicar approached with his useful air. Serena, he said, was with the sergeant and steady as a hymn. Miss Marple borrowed a length of his string and examined the reef knot, quick, clean, made by a hand that treated string as a tool rather than a decoration, then returned it, with a thank you exact as the knot itself. Mrs. Larkin's kitchen was the sort of cheerful confusion only competence can afford. Flour dust on the dresser, cooling racks that never cooled, the smell of nutmeg and industry. Her hands, large and clever, went on slicing a loaf even while her mouth exclaimed at Miss Marple's arrival. She admitted, laughing, that she had been born left-handed to the annoyance of a midwife and the profit of pastry. At Miss Marple's request, she folded a square of cake paper, twice across, twist tuck, leaving the neat little tail to the right as if guided by a hidden compass. Kindness sat easily on her. Cunning did not. Yet she had seen something. Twice she had straightened the cloth over the lemonade. Once she had found the ladle handle sticky with something thicker than lemonade, and wiped it by reflex. Not from her kitchen, she said with heat. She brought clean hands to parties, not bowls. Also, casually, carefully, Mr. Beale had come to the pump twice, once with lemons, once without. Miss Marple thanked her, believing her, and left before gratitude turned into talk. Len Harper, bicycling without purpose, intercepted her at the gate with the jaunty insolence that smells of fear. He advised her to hang the blame on Mrs. Lansing, who loved rules so that she might break them tidily, and to ask about a brother who wrote for money. Miss Marple observed a yellowing bruise along his jaw, and inquired, as one might ask the weather, how long it had been since he learned to open things that were not his. He laughed too loudly and whistled as she stepped past. Sergeant Lake, emerging from the Lansing house with Serena's signed confession to 2 altered sums in the fate ledger, listened to Miss Marple's account of cloth, ladle, and pump. The chemist, he said, was near certain the residue in Beale's little tin spoke Prussic. Beale, for his part, had a story ready, and another behind it. Who tied the rubbish? The vicar? He ties anything that will sit still. Miss Marple nodded at the information, without taking her eyes off the shape behind it. Sometimes it is not the string that matters, but the character of the knot. Mr. Sims crossed the green looking like a man who has argued with justice and found it literal. He had gone to Beale in temper and been mocked for his pains. Reminded too loudly that Tommy had light fingers, Lake asked him, as a favour, to leave all collars unseized until the police had done with questions. Sims, after a breath, agreed. They went together to the Lion, because men with wages return to the place where their odds are born. Beale stood there with a quiet half-circle of listeners, and a smile that never reached his eyes. Lake invited him to come along and answer once more about tins, rinds, and why a grocer should visit the pump without lemons. Beale said he had answered already, and suggested another pint instead. Miss Marple mentioned, as if recollecting a trifle, a tin of pepper once padded with rice flour, and the way Beale's paper was folded always the same, because he enjoyed doing things exactly. His look for a breath acknowledged the hit before hardening. Lake took him, not roughly. St. Mary Mead prefers its spectacles tidy. Outside, the wind changed like a thought. On impulse, Miss Marple returned to the pump. The rubbish parcel had vanished. In its place lay the vicar's string, loosened into a loop, the ends frayed as if worried by impatient fingers. She lifted it and read the untied reef. A left hand in a hurry, a thumb tugging the tail the wrong way. Back in her sitting room, she set the string by her saucer and arranged what the day had given. Serena's adjustments, the ledger's rubbed place, Beale's left-handed knife and the pricked rinds, Mrs. Larkin's cloth and sticky ladle, the boy's knack for numbers, Len's bruise and swagger, the parcel gone, the knot untied. The favour asked of Tommy, she thought, had two faces. Look at a book, stand at a table, and the second might have mattered more. He was not necessarily chosen. He might have been the convenient witness, whose full would look natural and make a noisy cover for something precise. She had reached that unkind idea when Mrs. Price Ridley swept in, declared the village unsafe, and sat. Miss Marple, very sweetly, asked for the fate subscription list to be brought to her in the morning, and to no one else. Order, she said, is made of details. Mrs. Price Ridley, affronted into obedience, agreed. When the door had shut, Miss Marple wrote a brief note to Lake. Do not rely on Beale's tin. Look for a smaller vessel that travels in a pocket to committee meetings. The hand shows left in public, but may pour with the right. Ask about a brother and a morning letter. She sealed it for dawn. Lake arrived almost with the light, her note unopened because he had thought the same. Mrs. Larkin had confirmed the sticky ladle. The vicar remembered tying the rubbish and had not untied it. Also a fresh piece. The postmistress reported an envelope to Mrs. Lansing from London on the morning of the fete. Serena admitted a brother who asked favours often, and gratitude seldom. She had written a refusal at last, and his reply lay unopened when the bell began. And the subscription list? Miss Marple asked. Coming, Lake said. In lists people confess their habits. Who pays promptly, who overpays to be noticed, who pledges and forgets. Sometimes a slip of paper tells you which pocket a vial would live in. As she closed the gate, she thought of Tommy Briggs, who saw numbers as faces and knew which one sulked. People too sulk in sums, she reflected. They betray themselves in the arithmetic of their kindness. Figures seldom forgive sums. Lake returned with the subscription list at 9:30, folded into the solemnity paper requires when respectable hands have touched it. He set it on Miss Marple's table without comment. She put on her spectacles and ran a forefinger down the columns with affection that never softened exactness. Names marched in order. Sums beside them wandered like sheep. Some entries had been corrected. The original figure rubbed to a ghost and a heavier number written over. The same crossing of the 7, the same prim pressure. Miss Marple smiled at the paper, as one smiles at a child's muddy knees, fondly and with understanding. Mrs. Larkin's hand is open and large, Lake said. Mrs. Lansing's is the prim one, I suppose. Indeed, Miss Marple murmured. But see these adjustments when the donor paid less than pledged. Mr. Beale loves improving clarity. His trade breeds that habit, and his figures look like price tickets. He corrects without noticing he is correcting. Is that a hanging matter? No, a matter of temperament, she returned. Temperament chooses method when opportunity is noisy. She could almost hear Tommy's amused whistle. Numbers to that boy had faces. He would have greeted these with a matey "Now then," before nudging them into honesty. A knock came like a second thought. The postmistress stood apologetic, a telegram between her fingers. "For Dr. Lansing," she said. Miss Marple sent a boy to fetch the doctor and laid the buff slip on the mantel-shelf. Its stamp showed it had been handed in just after noon yesterday and delayed by the fete. While they waited, she returned to the list. "Do you know," she said, "I begin to think the lemonade was a chorus line." The Star had a different entrance. Lake resisted the metaphor. "We found pricked rinds." "And surely someone pricked," she agreed. "But suppose a pocket dropper was meant for a particular cup. Add confusion, a fallen jug, a boy off his mark, and you get improvisation. Cyanide is impatient. The hurried hand might choose sweets rather than liquid." "Beale again," Lake said. "Possibly. Yet Mrs. Larkin folds as neatly without malice as she bakes with it. And there is another person whose life is string and small correctives. Serena. She would rather clean the world than poison it," Miss Marple said. "Think of someone who takes authority as change from a shop." Before he could answer, Dr. Lansing arrived, grave and courteous, and accepted the telegram. He read, then sat as if a chair had suddenly appeared. "It is from my brother-in-law," he said. "He has taken a position up north, and returns the fivers Serena would not send. He encloses a theatre bill. He has been using chemicals for a stage photographer. If Serena changes her mind, she can wire to the same studio." "Ah," Miss Marple said mildly, "so he knows the scent of almonds for honest reasons." "Because such people acquire things that can be misused," Lake said. "Or leave them where a friend can be tempted," she said. A commotion rose in the lane. The Lion's potboy pelted up, hatless. "Come quick, sir. Mr. Beale." They found the grocer on the step inside his shop, colour gone curious, a glass at his shoe. The smell met them at the door, that false happiness of almonds. Lake had his hand under Beale's jaw in a moment, shouting for the constable and the doctor. Miss Marple lifted the glass, saw the sugar crust smiling round the rim, and set it down again. "He took it himself, or someone wishes it to look so," she said. "Either way, we must ask who stood near enough to help." Dr. Lansing's arrival saved Beale by minutes. He had the man on the floor, diluted stomach contents, hands moving with trained indifference to ugliness. Beale retched, breathed, and lay trembling. Lake scooped the bottle that had rolled under the counter, smelling salts innocent as a maiden aunt. The stopper glittered from a recent rinse. A faint bitterness clung to the thread. "A pocket instrument," Miss Marple murmured. When Beale could speak, he said he had felt faint and dosed himself with his wife's salts. No, his wife knew nothing. She had gone to her mother. No, he had not seen anyone. Yes, he had been to the pump, because ladies always asked for more lemons than he sent. Yes, he sometimes carried a little tin. He waved a weak hand at the drawer. "For pins and clips," he muttered. Lake shut the drawer and posted a man at the door. Outside, the village held its breath as perfectly as any theatre audience waiting on a second act. "Well," Miss Marple said, "our murderer is frightened, which is both dangerous and helpful. When people hurry, they revert to what is most themselves." "What is most himself?" Lake asked. "Counting," she said. "Tidying, correcting, or the conviction that other people's neatness is an affront that must be cut to size. Watch for a person who cannot bear the untidy consequence of a first failure. They will attempt again, and soon." She went home for a shawl and found Sylvia waiting on the path, breathless with a story she had rehearsed. They boy, not Tommy, had shown her a fate trick. Prick a lemon with a pin and suck quickly, and you taste the sour without the sweet. He learnt it from Mr. Beale when he was smaller, and sometimes washed fruit. She did not know if it mattered. She merely thought Miss Marple liked tricks. Miss Marple did like them, particularly when mischief grew a root from somewhere sensible. She sent Sylvia home by the longer way and turned back across the green. Lake met her with news that explained nothing and aligned everything. The list shows Mrs. Price Ridley pledged 5 shillings and paid 3, then had the remainder adjusted after a word with Beale. She told Serena that a lady of her station considered public generosity sufficient. Serena, being tidy, made the book balance. Also, the bandmaster says that afternoon she scolded him for a sharp note and moved his stand to the right, though he keeps it left. Right hand writes, Miss Marple said softly. Left hand moves the knife and the ladle. A person who borrows and returns with authority. A person who expects paper to obey. You cannot mean— I can mean that spite is a domestic art, she said, and that envy wears pearls in the afternoon. Say nothing yet. Ask Mrs. Price Ridley whether she keeps smelling salts. Lake stared, then grinned despite himself. I shall be very respectful. He went. She walked on, unhurried, toward a parlour where Salts likely sat between a photograph of a late colonel and a bowl of wax fruit. She did not yet know whether the little bottle would smell of almonds, whether the stopper's thread would carry a betraying bitterness, whether a paper twist lay under a cushion awaiting discovery by a too zealous maid. She only knew the pattern had stopped resisting and would now submit to being unpicked, stitch by stitch, until it showed the shape it had been hiding. She straightened her shawl and kept walking. Mrs. Price Ridley received Miss Marple with the gratification of a woman who believes callers certify importance. The parlour presented its usual stiff correctness, antimacassars strained like starched opinions, a photograph of the late colonel presiding from a gilt oval, a bowl of wax fruit that had known neither dust nor bite. On a side table stood a chaste silver vinaigrette. She lifted it between 2 fingers. So sensible, Miss Marple said, admiring the filigree. I have never liked to faint. It gives too much work to other people. One must be prepared, Mrs. Price Ridley returned. The heat at the fete was insupportable. I nearly succumbed when that dreadful scene occurred, but I held myself upright. There is a standard. Miss Marple turned the vinaigrette in her palm as if admiring the chasing. Her thumb found the screw thread, where a faint roughness lingered under polish. So you were near the lemonade when the jug fell. I was everywhere it was necessary to be, Mrs. Price Ridley said with a smile that had corners. Quite, Miss Marple murmured. Sergeant Lake is inquiring in every direction. He wonders whether he might borrow this for an hour to compare fittings. Men are so literal. They imagine threads tell stories. Mrs. Price Ridley, affronted and flattered equally, allowed the loan as a patriotic sacrifice. She accompanied it with a small lecture on public spirit and the decay of the lower orders, then detained Miss Marple to say she had corrected Serena's misapprehension about pledges, because a lady's word is modified by her station. Miss Marple listened, as one listens to an ill-tuned harmonium, politely with intermittently absent eyes, and remarked only that harmony improves when all parts keep time. Outside, Sergeant Lake received the vinaigrette with careful hands and carried it at once to the chemist. The verdict came soon. No free acid, of course, only salts, yet the stopper thread betrayed a recent rinse in something bitterer than lavender. Not proof, not nothing. Lake's mouth took on that wry line of a man obliged to work with almosts. He sent the vinaigrette back by constable with thanks and more politeness than it had earned. Miss Marple did not go home. She crossed to the Lion and found Len Harper pretending not to be within. She remarked to the landlord, within Len's hearing, that Mrs. Price Ridley's vinaigrette had been of the greatest help, and that the sergeant, being a clever man, had already found in it more than one story. Len, who lived to be first with news, coloured and slipped out to retail the morsel. She watched him go with the half-smile of a woman who has wound a string about a kitten and waits to see which chair it will run under. By tea-time the kitten had chosen a chair. Serena Lansing, pale but resolved, arrived to say that Mrs. Price Ridley had called, all beneficence and bristle, to advise the proper way of clearing a husband's name. She said I had made the fate book a disgrace, and that she had tried to help me by explaining to Mr. Beale that he must make my figures appear correct. I had not asked him. I did not know he had done anything at all. People who give advice frequently also give orders, Miss Marple said, and the orders leave fingerprints, though not always on glass. She poured tea, watching Serena take cup and saucer. The right hand lifted, the left adjusted, the tidy little clink when china is satisfied. You did not faint at the fete. You had your salts. I do not keep any, Serena said, surprised. I have always thought them theatrical. Quite, Miss Marple said again, as if the word had many small drawers. I shall ask you a favour. Will you invite 3 or 4 of our friends to drink tea with you presently? Not a party, only a minute's comfort after a trying day. Mrs. Price Ridley dearly loves to demonstrate how to pour. Mrs. Larkin will come if cake is mentioned. Mr. Beale cannot, of course. Dr. Lansing must stand in his stead. Ask also Mr. Sims, and send a boy to the vicarage for 2 lemons. I have a purpose for them. Serena's eyebrows rose, then drew together. She had the sort of mind that, once given a neat direction, implements it entirely. Within the hour, the drawing-room at the doctor's was occupied by propriety and flower dust and honest worry in roughly equal shares. Mrs. Price Ridley installed herself where a hostess might stand if the hostess were not present. Mrs. Larkin set down a seed cake and apologized for its being plain, which it was not. Mr. Sims stood awkwardly near the hearth, too large for gentility. Dr. Lansing brought a boyish willingness to be ordered about. Miss Marple sat by the tea-tray and said nothing while people filled the room with their usual sentences. When the lemons came, Serena fetched a small board and a knife. She placed them to the left of the tray because she did things as books advised. Mrs. Price Ridley, seeing opportunity, stepped forward with a gracious, "Allow me, dear," and moved the board to the right with a little decisive tap. It was not much. It was everything. Her hand, gloved, because virtue wears gloves, reached for the knife in a right-handed flourish, then hesitated the smallest fraction, when blade and board did not align with the wrist's old habit. She transferred the knife without thinking to her left for balance, made the neat prick the fruit requires when one wishes the slices to pour, and changed the knife back to the right with a movement so swift it hoped to be unseen. Miss Marple's eyes, being older than most people's decisions, saw. She did not look at Lake, who had accepted a cup like any caller and sat in a low chair where he could be forgotten. She remarked instead, "How very clever to prick the lemon so the juice follows manners." Mrs. Larkin laughed. Mrs. Price Ridley said, "One learns in army stations and cut slices as if cutting gossip, thin even, capable of stinging." Serena poured. Miss Marple let the quiet go on 1 minute longer than comfort likes, and then said with a mildness that made the words more solid, "I am told, Mrs. Price Ridley, that you kindly lent your vinaigrette to more than one lady in distress yesterday. I am always ready to serve," Mrs. Price Ridley replied too quickly. "How fortunate," Miss Marple said, "because there was a moment when the ladle at the lemonade had been made sticky by something not lemonade, and a lady's vinaigrette could have sweetened the air for her while she waited." "Who was that lady?" No one spoke. Mr. Sims shifted. Dr. Lansing looked at Serena. Mrs. Larkin folded and unfolded a corner of her apron. Mrs. Price Ridley produced a small laugh for company. "I do not keep a diary of the faint-hearted. Perhaps Mrs. Larkin." "Me!" cried Mrs. Larkin, honest outrage reddening her neck. "I've never yet needed perfume to do a job." Miss Marple sighed, as for a lesson not learned. "No, it was a very tidy person who prefers to correct others' mistakes in public, and a very impatient person in private. Lake set down his cup. "We can be patient in this room," he said. "Outside, someone is not." The silence altered. There is a point at which ordinary talk realizes it has been replaced by a different conversation and retires. Mrs. Price Ridley drew herself up. "Sergeant, if this absurdity continues, I shall consult the magistrate." "You may," Lake said politely. "Before you go, however, allow me to return your vinaigrette." He took it from his pocket and set it beside her cup. Our chemist admired the polish. He also admired the thoroughness with which the stopper had been rinsed. "I wonder, could you show me how you unscrew it? My fingers are clumsy." It was clumsy of him, and entirely deliberate. A woman who lives by corrections cannot resist showing a man how to do a simple thing. Mrs. Price Ridley smiled, took the silver, and twisted the stopper out with a practiced left thumb pushing and the right hand steadying beneath. Habit wrote itself on the air. She lifted the open vinaigrette towards her face. A breath of lavender rose, too clean by half. "Thank you," Lake said. He did not look at Miss Marple, she did not look at him. Serena, with a small bravery, set the knife down on the right again. "If we are to have more lemon," she said, "perhaps Mr. Sims would do it. His hands are honest." Mr. Sims startled, then took the knife and cut without flourish, blade true, slices falling obediently. He was right-handed and did not think about it. Miss Marple waited until the room had resumed something like its ordinary shape, then patted her lap as if seeking a thimble, and said as to herself, "It is a curious thing how paper tells its own story. A twist folded twice by one hand cannot be imitated perfectly by the other. It is like handwriting. The slope betrays character. Tommy knew that trick. He could open and shut a twist without leaving a mark. It would have preserved a sweet for the right mouth if the world had not been so untidy. He would not have died if someone's plan had not been hurried by a fall and a boy stepping half a pace wrong." Mrs. Larkin's breath caught. "Step wrong?" "Only that," Miss Marple said. "No grand doom at work. The murderer had contrived a precise cup for a precise person at a precise minute, and then the jug broke in the scuffle, and there were hands and cries, and a sweet slipped into a pocket and came out at the wrong time. That is why there was fear this morning. Fear makes people attempt a second order, and badly." Lake rose. "We will go now, Mrs. Lansing." "Thank you, Mr. Sims, walk with me. Mrs. Larkin, if you would be so kind, look in on Mrs. Beale. She may need a practical. Woman more than a police officer." They filed out with that. Embarrassed decorum English people lend to solemn exits. In the hall, as Lake reached for his hat, Miss Marple said softly, "A little more patience, Sergeant. I should like our friend to hear that Tommy left a note with me, sealed and addressed, to be opened if harm came to him. It is not true, but it will do no harm to suggest it. A guilty hand cannot bear suspense. It will twitch toward the place where the evidence was meant to be." Lake's eyes warmed. "You will be the end of my nerves," he said. "Shall I spread it?" "By no means," Miss Marple said. "Tell one person who cannot keep a thing, Len Harper. He will carry it to the one who cannot endure a thing." They parted at the gate, as if they had discussed recipes. Miss Marple walked home down a lane that pretended it had never seen a murder. She sat by her window with her knitting, and watched how the village carried the news she had not quite given it. Len flew by within the half-hour, halted at the Lion to blurt all he knew and more, vanished toward the big house with the pearled knocker. Later, just before the lamps were lit, Mrs. Price Ridley's maid went quickly to the hedge, lifted a flat stone and took something small from beneath. She hid it in her apron and scurried toward the mews. Miss Marple rose, wrapped her shawl, and went out at the unhurried pace of an old lady who has remembered she ought to post a letter. She nodded to the maid, admired the roses, and kept walking as if nothing in the world could be more harmless than her presence. Miss Marple took the long way round, which in villages is the shortest route to the truth. The mews lane smelled of hay and creosote. The evening's first lamplight buttered the cobbles. The maid, Kitty, Mrs. Price Ridley's, moved like a girl who has been told to be quick without being seen. She vanished into the little alley behind the Lion. Miss Marple did not follow into the pinch point. She crossed to the smithy's yard and waited where an old pear tree shadowed the wall. Sound carries better than feet. A whispered exchange, a coin's brief ring, a scurry. Then Kitty came out alone, face blotched with determination, and almost collided with Sergeant Lake. He had arrived without fuss, as arranged, from the other end of the lane. He took Kitty by the elbow in the way of a man steadying a person, rather than seizing one. "You won't be blamed for telling a story straight," he said. "Who, what, where?" She looked ready to brazen it, then saw Miss Marple's small, incurious face, and surrendered to the relief of being the lesser sinner. From her apron, she produced a screwed metal piece wrapped in brown paper, and a folded paper twist tied with cotton. "She said to move it from under the stone," Kitty muttered. "Said there was wicked gossip, and she would not be humbled by spite. I was to give it to Mr. Harper, and he'd see it was burnt." She gulped. "I didn't know it was a poison thing. I won't have it said I did." "Who said burn?" Lake asked. "Mr. Beale, when he came yesterday with his collapsing," she blurted. "He told my mistress it came from his shop by accident, and she must rid herself of it. She told him she was not accustomed to being told what to do by tradesmen." Miss Marple accepted the wrapped screw, and felt the faint bitterness along the threads like a bad thought. "And the twist?" she asked. Kitty's eyes slid. "That was mine to bring back. It's just paper. Mr. Harper said he never wanted to see paper like that again. He said paper had nearly hanged him." "Len is always the hero of the wrong story," Miss Marple said. "Run along now, Kitty. Say you were delayed by a kind old lady who cannot find her way in the dark." The girl fled with gratitude, which is all the paid truth usually earns. Lake, with gloved fingers, placed the screw and the twist in an envelope and wrote the hour across the flap. "We baited one hook and caught 2 fish," he murmured. 3, Miss Marple said. Len took a coin for tidings, and Mrs. Price Ridley paid in pride. Mr. Beale added a sermon. Pride and sermons are inflammable. They walked to the police house without appearing to walk together. On the way, Len Harper came shouldering out of the Lion with belligerent cheerfulness that evaporated when he saw Lake. He swore he knew nothing about stones, screws or ladies' bottles, then, under the gentlest pressure, admitted he had been told to help a lady with a difficulty, which had seemed romantic until it turned practical. He did not like practical. He had also, he said, heard on good authority that a sealed letter had been left with Miss Marple. "It don't matter," he added too quickly. "No one cares what a dead lad wrote?" "On the contrary," Miss Marple said a little absently. "The dead insist on punctuation." She left him to his embarrassment and went home to put her kettle on because thinking goes better in steam. The chemist, woken to diligence, confirmed before 10 that the screw thread had been in contact with prussic. He could not say when. The twist had a ghost of the same. More telling, its fold bore the diagonal habit of a hand that starts left and compensates right, producing a tiny buckle where the paper tucks. Miss Marple thought of Mrs. Price Ridley's neatly reflexive pricking, and of Serena's knife shifted to the right, and of Mrs. Larkin's honest left. 3 lefts do not make a murderer. Habits must be matched with character. She slept briefly, like a cat on a sill, then woke at first light with the certainty that there was one more motion to be made before the picture settled. At 9, Mrs. Price Ridley entered Miss Marple's sitting room without being invited, which is its own confession. She wore a brooch as sharp as her mouth. "I am given to understand," she announced, "that you have been spreading tales about notes and evidence. It is wicked to alarm the village." "It is sometimes righteous," Miss Marple said pleasantly. "Sit down. It is fatiguing to lecture while standing." The older woman sat because habits obey chairs. She chose a place by the window, arranged her skirt with exactitude, and fixed Miss Marple with the look she used on committees. "I shall say this once," she declared. Your interference has encouraged the police to meddle with respectable Holmes. I have been pressed about a vinaigrette. I have been insulted in my own parlour by the implication that I do not pay subscriptions as I see fit. I have borne it. But I will not have my name coupled with a grocer's palpitations and a lout's swagger. If there is wickedness, it lies with those two, and with that unfortunate boy who was not well brought up. Tommy Briggs, Miss Marple said softly, had the sort of bringing up that tries to be good on insufficient income. It is not his fault that virtue is dearer than wickedness, but we will leave morality to the vicar. Tell me instead why your maid was instructed to move a small metal screw from under your hedge. Colour came and went across Mrs. Price Ridley's face like a fallen curtain half caught. She recovered to dignity. I know nothing of my maid's frolics. Then you will be relieved to know the screw is at the chemist's, Miss Marple returned. It bears a smell that does not belong to lavender. Also, you pricked a lemon with your left hand yesterday while demonstrating how to do it properly. I have noticed over some years that your corrections are left-handed even when your pen is right. That is a charming quirk, like the way your paper twists always finish with the tail to the right. This is nonsense, Mrs. Price Ridley said, but the word lacked weight. It is nonsense until it is arranged, Miss Marple agreed. Allow me to arrange it. You desired the fate to show proper standards. Serena Lansing's book offended you, because standards are offended by smudges. You told Mr. Beale to make the figures appear what you believed they morally were. He obliged because tradesmen are taught to oblige where possible. Tommy, with his inconvenient gift, saw the face of the figure that did not belong. You spoke to him. Perhaps you urged him to hold his tongue. Perhaps you merely indicated that it would be kinder for Mrs. Lansing if errors did not become public. But you did not trust the boy. So you planned something precise, something that would correct the entire situation in one neat act. You arranged, with a little help, that a particular cup would be touched by a drop from a stopper thread. You stood in the right place to make sure the right hand took the wrong cup. Mrs. Price Ridley's hands had ceased to arrange themselves. They lay very still. "Whose cup, pray?" she asked, and the question trembled under its polish. "Mr. Sims's," Miss Marple said. "You do not like him. He speaks bluntly in public, he laughs in the wrong places, and he has never been sufficiently impressed by you. Also, and this matters, you believed him careless with the boy. Punishing him would gratify duty and resentment at once. But the jug fell, the crowd pressed, and Tommy stepped half a pace wrong with a sweet in his hand that ceased to be innocent. Your precision became accident, and an accident is what you cannot endure. This morning, when you heard there was a note, you tried to move a piece of metal that might connect a bottle to a thread. You sent it to be burnt by a foolish young man who can be persuaded to do as he is told if the telling flatters him. You invent fairy tales, she said, faintly. We will let Sergeant Lake test the fairy. Tail against screws, threads. Hand timings, Miss Marple replied. But consider this, Mrs. Price Ridley. When Mr. Beale nearly died in his own shop, who had most to gain by his silence, not he? He would have pointed, under pressure, toward the lady who asked him to tidy a book, and the lady who stood beside the lemonade with a vinaigrette fit to freshen a ladle. He is venal, not brave. He would have bartered names for forgiveness. Someone anticipated that and added a lesson to his smelling salts. For a moment, the room was only clock and breath. Then Mrs. Price Ridley laughed, a small, dry sound like a moth freed from a lamp. You cannot make a charge from observation, she said. No jury will consent to hating the right person. They prefer butcher's boys. No jury is needed for what matters, Miss Marple said. Sergeant Lake will proceed with the law's slow music. I am content with the village's faster ear. It hears habits. It hears how a knot is untied and how a lemon is pricked. It knows who folds paper twice without thinking. It notices which hand corrects other people. Footsteps sounded on the path. Lake entered without his usual apology, holding an open envelope. The twist carries the same fold as the one found at the fete, he said. The screw belongs to a vinaigrette of unusual thread like yours, madam. The chemist has matched the trace to the residue on Mr. Beale's stopper. We'll have to take you in to answer questions. He was very polite, which is how Englishmen sign their warrants. Mrs. Price Ridley rose with a composure that had become effort. I shall go, she said. I have never refused the call of duty. At the door she turned, not to Lake but to Miss Marple. If people had kept their places, she said, voice low and furious, none of this would have been necessary. Miss Marple inclined her head. The trouble with places, she said gently, is that people move in them. She watched the door close and folded her hands in her lap for the space of a breath before rising. There remained one stitch to secure. She sent a note to Mr. Sims asking him to call that evening, and another to Serena Lansing, inviting her for cocoa after 9. Between them, like the quiet row between two patterns, she placed a small innocent paper twist folded twice and left its tail to the right, waiting to see which hand would twitch toward it and which would keep perfectly, guiltily still. Miss Marple laid the small paper twist on the edge of her work table as if it had arrived there by household drift. It lay with its little tail to the right, the way a certain kind of hand leaves it without thinking. She put out 2 cups, a plate of shortbread and a 3rd cup she did not intend to fill. Then she sat with her knitting, and let the room remember how to be ordinary after a day that had not been. When Serena Lansing came, neat and pale as a winter morning, Miss Marple rose and kissed her cheek in the old-fashioned way that steadies frightened women. Serena's eyes went at once to the twist because tidy minds inventory rooms. She did not touch it. She put her gloves together exactly, and laid them on the table's left as if balancing a sum. I have told Arthur everything, she began. He is angry that I did not tell him sooner, and kinder than I deserve. He says I am to resign from anything that involves figures until I have remembered humility. Humility is a tonic best taken in hot water with lemon, Miss Marple said. Sit, my dear. We shall have the kettle in a moment. Mr. Sims came next, big-shouldered in his Sunday jacket, hat in his hands. Grief had settled on him like honest dust. It did not make him dramatic, only heavier. He set his hat down and saw the twist, frowned as if at a careless parcel, and carried the hat to a safer spot lest it crush something fragile. He thanked Miss Marple in a voice that kept remembering not to break. We have been mistaken in some people, Miss Marple said, pouring. It is a relief to be right at last about others. Serena, you altered 2 sums because you feared a public muddle more than a private error. That is a small sin. Mr. Sims, you scolded a boy and trusted him too far. That is a small sin. Neither of you planned a death. Tommy's own small sin of pride, wanting to put a thing right with a flourish, was the sort puppies make. He would have grown out of it. Sims swallowed and looked at the hearth because men of his sort ask fires to witness them. If I had not sent him with money, he would be in my shop now, turning sausages with a grin, he said. It seems to me that's a long way to fall from a jug. It is a very short way when somebody puts a finger out, Miss Marple answered gently. Sergeant Lake has gone to do the law's part. Ours is to understand how the finger moved and why. She told them without rhetoric. Mrs. Price Ridley, offended by Serena's rubbings out, and emboldened by a lifetime of correcting other people, had pressed Mr. Beale to make the book appear as it ought. Beale obliged in the casual, venal way of a man who prefers smooth afternoons. Tommy, invited to glance at the columns because his gift was known and useful, had seen the sulking figure at once. When rebuke failed to frighten him, Mrs. Price Ridley contrived a remedy that would punish the butcher and erase the awkward witness in one gesture if occasion allowed. A stopper thread, dressed with a drop, to be brushed to a certain cup at a certain moment, and a sweet held in reserve to control the timing if the crowd misbehaved. She had the righteous woman's confidence that Providence assists those who enforce standards. But Providence, Miss Marple added mildly, dislikes being conscripted. The jug fell. The boy stepped wrong. The sweet changed hands. Cyanide is impatient. It will not wait for morals. Tommy's fall was as quick as the lady's plan, and less fussy. Serena clasped her hands until the knuckles paled. I should have seen that she— No, I would not have believed it of her. She spoke always of duty. Duty is like starch, Miss Marple said, knitting. It stiffens what is there. On a good cloth, very handsome. On a poor one it cracks. The door opened without ceremony. Lake stood there, rein on his hat brim, eyes grave and satisfied. We have Beale's statement, he said. He admits supplying, he calls it, a drop from a bottle used for plate work, after she told him the fate must be kept from scandal. Says he thought she meant to frighten Sims, not kill. He brought the smelling salts this morning, meaning to fetch back the screw because he smelt trouble coming. Found he'd been anticipated and panicked. He'll face a magistrate for his share, but he's pointing with both hands. The vinaigrette thread, the screw, the twist. Chemistry says what you said it would. Chemistry is a man, Miss Marple said, and seldom contradicts a tidy woman if the tidy woman is right. Lake's mouth flickered. He saw the twist, left as if by accident, and kept his eyes from it as scrupulously as a cat pretends a fly is beneath notice. I'll not stay, he said. You have better tea. But I wanted you to know that she said at the end that if people had kept their places, as you told me, none of it would have been necessary. People very seldom keep their places, Miss Marple said. Chairs keep places. People move. When he had gone, quiet returned the way a cat returns, slowly and owning the room. Serena reached for the teapot. Her fingers brushed the little twist and left it precisely where it lay. Mr. Sims did not look at it again. He had nothing to hide and therefore nothing to tidy. Miss Marple watched them without seeming to. She saw the way Serena's right hand poured, the way her left adjusted, the way she set a lemon slice with the point toward the spout, because that is how one keeps drips from misbehaving. She saw Mr. Sims take the cup in both palms, as men do who have carried hot things all their lives. The twist might have been a pebble or a pea. It did not grow magnets in guilty hands. I told a small story about a note, Miss Marple said after a moment, as casually as one remarks on a shower passing. There was no note. I wished to see who could bear the suspense and who could not. It is not fair. It is sometimes necessary. Serena looked stricken, then relieved. I would have had to tell you if there had been one, she said. I am not fit for intrigues. You are fit for very many things, Miss Marple said kindly. They do not include poison. Mr. Sims set his cup down with care. I would like to pay for the boy's funeral, he said. Not as penance, as what is due, and I would like to have the lad's name said right in church. Not as a lesson. It will be said right, Miss Marple answered. I shall see to that by appearing to suggest it, and then withdrawing so the vicar can think it was his own idea. Men of God are like cacti. They flourish when not watered too obviously. The smallest of smiles touched Serena's mouth. What will become of her? The law will do as the law does, Miss Marple said. It will say she intended one thing and accomplished another and is therefore responsible. The village will do as the village does. It will remember for a time and then fold the memory into a drawer labeled a pity. Beale will contrive excuses and be contrite to customers. Len will swagger about his narrow escape from hanging paper. And you, my dear, will ask Mr. Peabody to take back the fate accounts when his shingles permit. Serena nodded, colour returning. I shall sit on chairs, not on committees for a while, she said. Arthur will be glad. When they had gone, the room altered its expression, the way rooms do when they are left alone with a person who has been looking at them for years. Miss Marple tidied the cups and let the twist be. Its tail pointed right, a little flag of a defeated habit. She went to the window because it is good to look out after you have looked in. The green lay washed and mild under evening. The bunting had been taken down, and the trestles leaned like ungainly gentlemen waiting for dark. Across the way, Sylvia Carter came out with a shawl and stood on the step as if asking the evening to come in and be company. Miss Marple tapped the pane. The girl looked up and smiled, a small, brave thing. It is a curious economy, Miss Marple thought. How much of murder is thriftily made from small savings? an erased figure here, a corrected pledge there, a dab of something sharp on a thread, a pride rubbed to brightness. The great passions exist, but villages run on pin-money vices and teacup virtues. Tommy Briggs had been frivolous with a gift and serious with his heart. He had tried to make numbers honest, because it pleased him to see them stand up straight. He had died because someone mistook tidiness for righteousness, and believed that a life could be aligned like a mantle ornament. She blew out the lamp and sat a little longer, in the soft dark, while the kettle muttered to itself on the hob. Presently a knock sounded, not urgent. Sylvia came in at Miss Marple's call, sat on the stool by the fender, and cried in the useful way girls cry when they are with someone who won't make a fuss. Miss Marple patted her shoulder and spoke of practical things: the vicar's visit, Mr. Sims's offer, the propriety of a small wreath from the shop. She did not tell the girl all she knew. Knowledge is like lace. Too much of it on a young neck looks silly. When Sylvia had gone calmer, Miss Marple picked up the little twist, smoothed it open and folded it again, this time with the tail to the left, because patterns can be altered with a little practice. She set it on the mantel for the cat to bat later, and smiled, not at cleverness but at the comfortable proof that habits need not be prisons. Outside, a fox barked once in the copse, and then thought better of it. The village put its lamps out. Miss Marple went to her room, saying to herself, as one says a prayer spoken too often to be pious and not often enough to be useless, that people are much alike everywhere, and that nothing teaches so well as being found out gently. She slept, which is wisdom's other name. The trial came quietly, without the village spectacle Mrs. Price Ridley had once imagined for herself. She went away between two constables with her head high, refusing even then to be untidy. The papers reported it with less relish than they did scandals in London. Provincial crimes seldom sell unless they involve romance. Yet in St. Mary Mead it was discussed in hushed voices for weeks, then months, then like bunting packed in a trunk, folded away under what was. Beale in the end was fined and censured, escaping prison by the thin margin of his grocer's usefulness and a promise never again to dabble in what he could not pronounce. He kept his head down, and curiously his trade prospered. People enjoy purchasing from a man who has once been nearly hanged. Mr. Sims laid Tommy Briggs in the small churchyard under a headstone plain as bread. The village turned out, not only out of duty but because Miss Marple quietly reminded them that the boy had been everybody's errand-runner and confidant in little matters. Sylvia Carter stood with her shawl proud and trembling. Mr. Sims's hand, heavy but kind, rested on her shoulder. The vicar read the words without pomposity, which was unusual and therefore noted. Afterwards, Miss Marple contrived that the wreath from the Fate Committee should be set precisely in the centre, an oddity for so small a boy, but a justice of its own sort. Serena Lansing, lighter by the removal of a burden, stepped back from all ledgers and devoted herself to parish visiting, where her tidiness could be poured into bandages and clothing parcels rather than figures. Dr. Lansing watched her with affection renewed by crisis. Sometimes calamity restores marriages as pruning restores roses. Mrs. Larkin returned to her ovens and became the village's authority on honest bread, her laugh now freer for having been wrongly suspected. Len Harper, after much swagger, was caught poaching in a neighbouring wood and fined heavily. The village agreed that the magistrate's time had finally been well spent. As for Miss Marple, she said little. She attended the service, nodded to neighbours, and returned to her knitting. When pressed to explain how she had known, she only smiled and spoke of habits. "It is not chemistry alone that betrays a person," she said mildly over tea with the vicar. "It is the way they fold paper, or which hand they use when they believe no one sees. People betray themselves in the smallest actions, just as Tommy saw which figure sulked in a column. He had that gift, poor child. And when one knows how people behave, one knows where the truth will hide. The vicar remarked that such insight was nearly divine. Miss Marple corrected him gently. "No, merely human. We do not change much, you know. The sins of envy and pride are quite as constant as seed cake at tea. Only the manner of their expression alters. On her walk home that evening, she paused at the lich gate where Tommy had once shown Sylvia how to twist and untwist paper. The autumn light fell mild across the graves. She thought not of triumph, but of balance restored. A boy mourned properly, a village reminded of its better self, and a murderer unmasked not by clever contraptions, but by the relentless honesty of observation. She adjusted her shawl and continued up the lane, her small figure almost lost against the hedgerows, carrying in her mind that same quiet truth which had served her all her life. In villages and in cities alike, evil is only goodness gone crooked, and if one watches carefully, the crookedness always shows. Thus the matter of the butcher's boy came to its end. The green grew lively again with markets and gossip. The fete was remembered for its games rather than its tragedy, and Miss Marple, in her neat sitting-room with her tea and her knitting, reflected, not without sadness, but without bitterness, that human nature, however much it disappoints, remains forever her most inexhaustible study.